Imagine this. You're standing on a scorched stretch of earth outside a shattered European city. The ground trembles beneath your boots, not from bombs, but from weight, an impossible weight. Ahead of you squats a machine so large it looks less like a weapon and more like a building ripped from its foundations. Steel plates the thickness of a man's forearm glisten with oil and dust. Exhaust fumes burn your throat. Somewhere deep inside the hull, engines growl like chained animals. You are standing next to the Karl-Gerät, a 124-ton self-propelled mortar, the largest mobile artillery weapon ever built. And here is the terrifying truth. Despite its size, despite its power, despite the resources poured into its creation, this monster will almost never decide the outcome of a battle. You just don't know that yet. In the late 1930s, German military planners were obsessed with a single problem: concrete. Thick, reinforced concrete. The kind protecting fortresses like the Maginot Line and the massive Soviet defences being poured across Eastern Europe. Conventional artillery struggled to crack them. Dive bombers were vulnerable. Infantry assaults were suicidal. So the question became simple and brutal. How do you smash a fortress without sacrificing thousands of men? The answer, at least on paper, was size. The Karl-Gerät was conceived in 1936 by Rheinmetall as a siege weapon in the purest sense. Not a tank, not field artillery, a mobile mortar designed to lob shells so massive they could pulverize bunkers from above. The mortar's caliber was 600 millimeters. Later variants reached 540 millimeters. To put that in perspective, the barrel alone was wide enough for a grown man to crawl through. Each shell weighed between 1,700 and 2,170 kilograms, over 2 tons of steel and explosive. When fired, it could travel nearly 10 kilometers and hit with the force of an earthquake. The explosion could carve craters over 15 meters wide and several meters deep. Entire concrete casemates were meant to collapse inward like sandcastles. On paper, it was devastating. But paper doesn't smell like burning oil. Paper doesn't shake your bones. Paper doesn't have to move. You're part of the crew now, one of roughly 21 men required just to operate the vehicle itself, not counting the massive support units needed to keep it alive. You climb inside, and the first thing that hits you is the heat. Even before firing, the interior is suffocating. Engines roar, hydraulic systems hiss, metal groans under stress. There is no comfort here, no illusion of safety. The armour is thick, up to 100 millimeters in places, enough to shrug off small arms fire and shrapnel. But you know something the propaganda posters don't mention. If enemy artillery finds you, armour won't matter. You are too big to hide, too slow to escape. The Karl-Gerät can move under its own power, yes, but only at a top speed of around 10 kilometers per hour, on perfect ground, on roads that can support its weight. Every bridge is a gamble. Every soft patch of earth is a potential grave. Transporting it is an operation in itself. To move long distances, the Karl must be broken down and hauled by rail in multiple pieces, reassembled at the front, fueled, tested, calibrated. This can take days, sometimes weeks, all while the war moves on without you. And yet, standing there beside it, you feel invincible, because when it fires, the world ends. The first shot is unforgettable. The mortar recoils violently, the entire vehicle shuddering as if punched by a god. The sound isn't a bang, it's a deep, concussive roar that slams into your chest. Dust rains from the sky. Birds vanish. Men who hear it from kilometers away swear the earth itself screamed. This is what German High Command wanted. Fear, shock, psychological dominance, a weapon that didn't just destroy fortifications, but morale. By 1940, only 6 Karl-Gerät mortars existed. Each one was given a name: Adam, Eva, Thor, Odin, Loki, Zeus. Mythic titles for a mythic weapon. They were rare, precious, treated less like equipment and more like legends. But legends have a weakness. They demand perfection. Every shell must be crane-loaded. Every firing stresses the barrel. After a handful of shots, maintenance becomes critical. Replacement parts are scarce. Fuel consumption is enormous. Ammunition supply is painfully slow. In a fast-moving war, speed is life, and the Karl-Gerät has none. Still, as the early victories roll in, no one wants to hear doubts. France falls, Europe burns, and somewhere behind the lines, you wait with your monster, convinced that when the time comes, when the order finally arrives, you will unleash something unstoppable. You don't yet realize that the war you were built for is already changing. The order finally comes. You don't hear cheering. There is no celebration, just clipped commands and the metallic echo of preparation. The Karl-Gerät is being readied for its purpose at last. This isn't a parade weapon anymore. This is Sevastopol, 1942. Imagine this. You're inside the steel belly as cranes swing overhead, lowering a single shell into place. 2,000 kilograms, almost the weight of a small car. It moves slowly, deliberately, because one mistake here doesn't just delay the mission, it kills men. Sweat runs down your spine despite the cool air outside. The smell of grease, cordite, and exhaust oil coats your lungs. Outside, Soviet fortifications stretch across the hills. Concrete bunkers, buried artillery, positions designed to survive months of bombardment. German infantry have already learned what happens when you attack these head-on. Machine gun fire, mines, artillery barrages that tear companies apart in minutes. This is why you're here. When the first round fires, the effect is immediate and horrifying. The ground heaves. Nearby soldiers instinctively duck, even though they know it's friendly fire. The shell arcs invisibly, then disappears into the earth miles away. Seconds later, a detonation blooms on the horizon, an eruption of dust, flame and debris that dwarfs anything conventional artillery can produce. Reconnaissance reports confirm it. One bunker is simply gone. Not damaged, not cracked. Gone. For a moment, it feels like vindication. Like all the steel, all the fuel, all the effort was worth it. You hear officers whispering words like decisive and unstoppable. Propaganda cameras roll. This is what the Karl-Gerät was made for. But then the hours pass, then the days, and the cracks begin to show. Each shot takes time, sometimes over 10 minutes between rounds. Ammunition resupply crawls forward on specialized transporters that themselves are vulnerable to air attack. Soviet artillery begins to adjust its fire. You hear the whistle of incoming shells now. Not close, but closer than before. You realize something chilling. You are not hunting the enemy. You are being hunted. The Karl-Gerät cannot relocate quickly. Turning the vehicle is slow. Repositioning it requires careful ground preparation. If counter-battery fire finds your coordinates, there is no sprinting away, no evasive maneuver. You sit. You wait. You trust that your armor and luck will hold. This is the psychological weight no one warned you about. You are operating the biggest gun in the war, yet you feel exposed, naked. Every firing reveals your position like a flare in the dark. Aircraft are your greatest fear. A single bomb doesn't need to penetrate your armor. It only needs to cripple you, destroy a track, rupture a hydraulic line, knock out your support vehicles. And without support, the Karl-Gerät is just a 124-ton coffin. At Sevastopol, the weapon does its job, on paper. Fortifications are smashed. Deep bunkers collapse. Soviet defenders are forced to abandon positions that had resisted months of shelling. But the overall pace of the battle barely changes. Infantry still have to advance. Casualties still mount. The siege drags on for weeks. You begin to understand the uncomfortable truth. Yes, the Karl-Gerät can destroy anything it hits, but it can only hit a few things, slowly, at enormous cost, and war does not wait. By the time Sevastopol falls in July 1942, the battlefield has already moved in the minds of German planners. The Eastern Front is expanding, distances are vast, logistics are stretched thin. What good is a siege weapon when the war has become a series of fluid, brutal, fast-moving engagements? The Karl-Gerät was built for the last war's idea of combat. Now, you feel obsolete. Maintenance issues worsen. The recoil stresses the chassis with every shot. Barrels wear rapidly. Spare parts must be custom made. Fuel consumption drains supplies, better used by tanks and trucks that can actually exploit a breakthrough. And there's something else. Something quieter but more damning. The enemy adapts. Soviet engineers learned to disperse, to build deeper, to avoid concentrating key assets in single, massive bunkers. The Karl-Gerät needs fixed targets, predictable ones. Without them, its purpose evaporates. As the months pass, deployments become rarer. The weapon is moved, hidden, protected, almost sheltered, like a fragile relic rather than a tool of war. When it fires, it still terrifies everyone who hears it. But fear alone does not win campaigns. Inside the hull, you sit and wait more than you fight. You listen to distant battles you cannot reach. You hear rumours, Stalingrad, encirclements, entire armies vanishing. And slowly, painfully, it dawns on you. You are part of something massive, powerful, and utterly out of sync with reality. The biggest gun in the war is becoming irrelevant. Imagine this. You're no longer at the front. Not really. The sounds of battle are distant now. Muffled thunder on the horizon while the real war tears forward without you. The Karl-Gerät sits camouflaged beneath netting and branches, its massive barrel elevated uselessly toward a grey sky. Rust creeps into seams that once gleamed with pride. Oil pools beneath the hull. And you wait. By late 1942 and into 1943, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. The war has changed. It has accelerated. What began as carefully planned sieges has become a grinding, mobile slaughter. Tanks clash across open fields, infantry fight street to street, air power dominates everything, and you are a siege weapon with no siege to fight. Every movement order now feels like a liability. Rail lines are bombed regularly. Allied air superiority is growing. Transporting the Karl-Gerät, dismantling it, loading it onto rail cars, reassembling it near the front, requires time Germany no longer has. Each relocation is a logistical nightmare, involving hundreds of men, cranes, security units, and fuel convoys. And fuel is life. The Karl consumes it voraciously, enough to run multiple panzer units for days. Every litre burned here is a litre not reaching tanks desperately trying to plug gaps in collapsing fronts. You hear the grumbling from logistics officers. You see the looks. The unspoken question hangs in the air. Why are we protecting this thing? Inside the crew, morale erodes. You were once elite, chosen to operate the most powerful artillery weapon ever built. Now you feel like caretakers of a museum piece that the war has left behind. Training drills replace combat. Maintenance replaces purpose. Days blur into weeks of inactivity, broken only by air raid alarms. And those alarms are terrifying, because you know how vulnerable you are. A single Allied bomber formation could erase you from the map. Not because the Karl-Gerät is fragile, but because everything around it is. The ammunition trucks, the cranes, the fuel carriers, the support crews. Destroy those, and the weapon is useless even if it survives intact. This is the paradox you live with. You are too valuable to risk, and too impractical to use. At one point, orders arrive to prepare for possible deployment against Leningrad. Then they're cancelled. Another plan involves Warsaw, then silence. The Karl-Gerät becomes a contingency weapon, a last resort option no one wants to actually commit. Meanwhile, Germany bleeds. Stalingrad is lost in February 1943, an entire army gone. Kursk follows, a catastrophic failure where mobility, not raw firepower, decides the outcome. You hear numbers whispered in hushed tones. Thousands of tanks destroyed, entire divisions shattered, the kind of losses your weapon was supposed to prevent. But you weren't there. You couldn't be. The psychological weight is crushing. You were promised significance, decisiveness. Instead, you sit beside a steel titan that feels increasingly absurd. Every bolt, every plate represents resources that could have built dozens of tanks, hundreds of guns, thousands of rifles. You start to see the Karl-Gerät for what it truly is. Not a weapon of war, but a monument to a flawed idea. Even when it does fire again, the impact feels hollow. Yes, a target disappears. Yes, the explosion is monstrous, but the front lines barely shift. Enemy forces adapt, disperse, retreat, counterattack elsewhere. War flows around you like water around a stone. By 1944, the Allied landings in Normandy confirm the final verdict. Speed wins, air power wins, logistics win. Siege weapons have no place in a war measured in hours and kilometers. And deep down, you know it. You're standing beside the biggest gun ever built, and for the first time, you feel small. Because the weapon you serve no longer frightens the enemy. It embarrasses its creators. Imagine this. It's 1945. The war is collapsing inward on itself. The sky belongs to the enemy now. You hear Allied aircraft long before you see them, their engines droning with a confidence the Luftwaffe once had. Roads are choked with refugees, retreating units, burned-out vehicles. Germany is shrinking by the day, and somewhere behind the chaos, the Karl-Gerät waits. Not in glory, not in battle, but in hiding. You are ordered to keep it intact, not to use it, just to preserve it, camouflage it, guard it, move it if you can, destroy it if capture becomes imminent. The irony is bitter. This weapon, designed to smash fortresses, now exists only to avoid confrontation. There are no grand final missions, no last stand where the Karl-Gerät turns the tide. Its enormous shells sit unused because there are no suitable targets left, and no time to prepare even if there were. Cities fall not because their bunkers are destroyed, but because supply lines collapse, airfields are lost, and command structures disintegrate. The war ends not with a thunderous shot from the biggest gun in history, but with silence. Some Karl-Gerät mortars are sabotaged by their own crews, explosives placed carefully to ensure the barrel cracks, the breech warps, the chassis is ruined beyond repair. Others are simply abandoned, hulking skeletons of steel, waiting for the enemy to arrive. And they do. When Allied forces finally encounter these machines, the reaction is telling. There is awe, yes. Photographs are taken. Soldiers stand beside the barrel for scale, dwarfed by its size. Engineers examine it, puzzled, curious. But no one is afraid. Because by 1945, fear no longer comes from size. It comes from planes you never see until bombs fall. From artillery that relocates before you can respond. From tanks that strike fast and vanish. From factories that replace losses faster than you can count them. The Karl-Gerät is shipped away, studied, dissected. One ends up in a museum, a relic, a cautionary tale cast in steel. And standing there, imagining yourself as one of its crew, the final realization settles in with a cold, suffocating weight. You served the biggest weapon of the war. You stood beside a machine capable of leveling fortresses. You operated a gun that could make the ground itself recoil. And it did not matter. Because war is not won by the largest gun. It is won by the right weapon, at the right time, in the right war. The Karl-Gerät arrived too late for the kind of fighting it was built to dominate. It consumed resources Germany could no longer afford. It solved a problem that no longer defined the battlefield. A monster, yes. Terrifying, yes. But ultimately useless. A steel giant that could shatter concrete, yet could not stop history.